Hi there. I've had a couple of people write to me, I guess they've got time to paint at the moment, about using the gel medium to paint with acrylics to do the style of painting that most of you know me for. And I've also had a request to go over how I do the leaves, and specifically this is the actual pattern that the person is painting. So this was the original piece, and these are the leaves in question. So I have called these my basic Zhostovo leaf, and I did this leaf on hundreds of trays, and it's a good leaf to learn to paint. So it isn't all that easy, but it's actually not all that difficult either. I pulled out a worksheet that I did for some article sometime or another, and this is the same leaf. And if you can pause this video when you're watching it, you can see the different steps. There's the first step, which is undercoating in white, and that's because we're on a black background, so it helps us to be able to have this second step show through, which is your color, and that can be any color. There's actually a blue-green little leaf here, and these are I'm not quite sure what color that was, but I'll be using sap green for the demo today. And then the third step is to put in some alizarin crimson, and in this case I used navy blue, but if Payne's gray is available I would use that. The third step is separating the light areas from the dark areas on the leaf, and then when that's all done we have to do the wet into wet stages. And this all has to be done kind of all at once, and this is where some people kind of run into trouble, because you don't really have time to think. You actually have to know what you did here. You have to learn the strokes and where they're going and which one goes after the other. But this is basically what I'm going to show you today. I've already put some leaves down here just so they would be dry. But before I paint them, let me run over a little larger and maybe explain a little bit about the leaves. When I paint leaves, I'm usually thinking round in my head. That's the shape, and within that shape there's usually a vein line, and sometimes it curves one way and sometimes it curves the other. So this would be the end of the tip of your leaf, and this is the stem that meets your leaf. So you can see it's the same leaf, but it's just the vein is curving one way or it's curving the other. And you have to make that decision before you paint the leaf, because that tells us an awful lot about the leaf. When you start to paint this, I paint the strokes in order, especially, again, as I mentioned, these last steps. All of these steps have to be done all at once. And so if you're used to painting in order, it's kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You don't have to really think about it. Here, if I tell you that I paint from light to dark, you don't see it because it's all white. You don't see it there. You don't even see it here. But once you get into here, we paint from light to dark, and you'll see how that works. So I always start on the light side of the leaf, and once you know the curve, then the light side is always the side of the leaf that's, let's call it under the curve. Under the curve. So on a leaf where it curves the opposite way, obviously the light side is here. Let's go back and turn it around so you can see that it is under the curve. So the light side is on the inside of the curve vein, which means our dark side is always going to be on the outside of that curved vein. When you have leaves that curve one way and then curve the other, usually when I paint, I do all of them, the similar ones, at the same time. So anything with a vein line curving this way, I'd do all of these, and then I'd go back and do the others. And again, you'll see that in a minute why that is. It's just faster and it's less confusing, really. So on the leaf, the first stroke that you're going to paint is on the lightest part of the light side, and that's going to be this area up in here, which is closest to the stem would be here. So that would be supposedly our lightest stroke. And if you look at a finished leaf over here, I hope this shows up, but in fact that is the lightest stroke. And I can turn it around, maybe you'll understand it better. So you can see that that one is the lightest stroke and this one's the lightest stroke. So in here would be our first stroke, and that would be our lightest stroke. And if this was the light side here, it would be the lightest stroke. The strokes that I used on this piece, this is a comma-like stroke, and the reason I say like is because I don't finish it with a tail. It begins like a comma and you move through it like a comma, but before you have a chance to finish it, you kind of wisp off the end. And again, I'll show you that in a minute. So that's our first stroke. The next stroke would then go in here and here, and it doesn't matter how many strokes it takes to fill the leaf. Whatever number it takes, you just start here, you work your way down. Then we get to the dark side of the leaf. You'll note that on the light side, the strokes started at the vein line, and then they moved out towards the outside shape of the leaf, and they kind of finish off pointing to the end of the leaf. They don't go there, but they point there. This one would be the same. It starts at the vein line, kind of moves to fill the outside of the leaf shape, but before you have a chance to get down here, it kind of gets cut off. On the dark side, the strokes start on the outside of the leaf and move in. So these are starting here and moving out, and on the dark side they move in like this. And again, the order, I go 1, 2, 3, whatever, and on the dark side it's 4, 5, 6, or you could do 6, 5, 4. Like, you could change the order on the dark side if you felt more comfortable. So, okay, let's just get some paint in the brush. Now, when you're doing stroke work, it's important that you don't have too much water in your brush. Make sure you squeeze all of the water out and use the paint at 100%. Now, on these two sample leaves that I do up here, I'm going to use this big flat brush, and I'm only doing that so you can actually see the chisel edge of the brush, so you can see the direction of the strokes. So first thing I want to do is look at the shape. I have to determine the curve. Then I know my first stroke is going to go on the light side right here, and this is actually where they're headed, to the end or the tip of the leaf. And the way to get them to look like they're going there, and I'll turn my piece here, just make sure that you can see this with the camera. The chisel edge of the brush, whether it be a flat brush or filbert, or even a flat brush that you load to be flat, or a round brush that you load to be flat, the point of the chisel, or the chisel points towards that spot. Do you see that? Look, watch. So it's aimed at that spot. And starting at the vein line, you notice I'm not worried about trying to fit it into the curve of the vein. I just touch with the brush, chisel pointed to the spot, press, and as I come around to fill the shape, I come off the stroke. So I didn't finish it, but the little ends of the paintbrush here, the paint, look like they're going towards that spot. Now the second stroke is an S-like stroke. So again, starting kind of at the vein line and looking at the spot, and with my chisel pointed, pointed towards that spot, I'm going to touch, no pressure, kind of start to move through my stroke, and then pressure in the middle, then no pressure. And as I come off the stroke, again, I'll just wisp off towards the spot. Now these are pretty ugly, but it's the only way I know to show you all the steps within the stroke. So the third stroke on this, I would point to the spot, touch, it would be kind of an S-like, press, no pressure, and off, and try and have it come point to the spot. Okay, let's go to the dark side. On the dark side of the leaf, now here's where it's important. Again, the chisel edge of that brush is still pointing to the spot, and you start about halfway up the leaf with the chisel pointing to the spot, and you just pull kind of a half of a C stroke. There's nothing to it. It's just chisel and around to fill the shape. The next one is exactly the same, except it just starts down here. So chisel, and you'll notice that I only really got 2 strokes in there. So a couple of other things to notice. There's lots of dark space left in here. That's a good thing. And I didn't actually fill all of this outside shape, so there's space left. That's a good thing. You'll see more as we progress through the different steps. So that worked fine, and I'm able to pull my strokes towards myself because of the direction. I can see the chisel, I can see my brush spreading, but I can't do that on this side because then I'd have to have my hand over the brush and I can't see what I'm doing. So I have to turn this around and I have to go at it from the other direction. So my first stroke starts at the vein line, chisel points, whoops, better get it in the camera, chisel points to the spot. It's touch. It's kind of like a comma stroke. Press and then move towards the spot. The next one is an S-like stroke. Point to the spot. Press in the center. Come off. Put some paint in your brush. And the next one, point to the spot. And this would be like a little S stroke as well. On the dark side, chisel pointing to the spot. I move about halfway up my leaf. Little chisel pointing to the spot, and it's kind of like a little C stroke, part of a C stroke. Move down here and fill in the rest of the leaf. Okay, that's the order. I've done some here just so they would be dry. Excuse my arm in the camera, but it's the only way I can get to my paint. So we'll do a couple here. Here's my vein line. There's my outside shape in case you can't see it. So pointing, this is now a filbert. So it's still a flat brush, except it has a rounded end. It's going to give me a little nicer shape than what I got using that flat brush. So pointing the chisel to the spot, which is the end or the tip of the leaf, and I just press and pull towards the spot. Put a little bit more paint in my brush. Now the S stroke, again, see the chisel pointing to the spot? There it is. Chisel, press, and off. And another one, chisel, and just a little bit of a one. And then go to the dark side, chisel pointing to the spot. If you can see it, hope that shows. Chisel pointing to the spot. Go about halfway up the leaf. Chisel, 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 press. Come down, chisel, and press. So there's another one. He turned out a little bit bigger than these, but that's okay. Let me do this one over here because this one, the vein line is running the opposite way, right? So this will be my light side, and I'll turn my piece around so I can see myself do the strokes. So it's chisel pointing to the spot. You see this? Chisel, press, and then lift off before you get there. And then still again pointing to the spot. Now it's pressure in the middle of the stroke. Another little one. And then halfway up the leaf on the dark side, pointing to the spot. Chisel, and in, and chisel, and in, and I only got 2 in there. All this dark space is great because it means that I don't have to, I can actually see now where the shadow parts of the leaf are going to be. So the next step is to add some color. So let me I'll just do one of these while I'm waiting for those other 2 to dry. And I've got some Payne's Gray here on my palette. There's still a little white in my brush, which not nuts about, but so you can use this as a chance to practice. Let me see, is that dry? Not really. Not really. I'll go over it anyway. You can practice your strokes again. So there's my spot, my chisel. And what you want to do with this is basically, you can see that white pressing through. You have to wait till this is dry. Don't do this. Don't do this at home like this. Don't do what I do. Do what I say. And this is the dark side. Not enough paint in my brush. So basically, I've just covered up the white, right? So let me do that on these, the little ones. I know some of them are dry because I did them earlier, so it's a dry one. So, comma, S, S. I think I used this brush for oil paint, and it's not working real well. I didn't clean it well enough. Up the dark side. This one's dry. So, comma, number 1. S, number 2. Another partial S is number 3. And make sure you cover up all that white. We don't want it showing. To the dark side, 4. So I've got 5 strokes on these. I'm going to turn this around now so I can see what I'm doing. There's my comma. There's my S. There's just a little dab, really. Pointing the chisel again. Remember that. It's very important. You also notice that once I get that chisel pointed, I don't turn my brush to create the stroke. Oh, not dry. That one's dry. I don't turn the brush. If you watch the brush handle, all I do is move the brush, but I don't turn it or twist it or do anything cute. I just get it pointed in the right direction to start with, and then I just move it to fill the space that I want. So let's see now. I think that one's dry enough. I don't know whether I need all of these, but we'll put some color on here anyways. So when I'm working on a tray, I would go around and do all of these steps all at once. I do all the white, and then I go back and I do all the color, and then I go back and I do all the third steps, separating the light and the dark areas. But then when it comes to finishing the leaves, you have to finish those last few steps all at once. I think that's dry enough. We'll see in a second, won't we? No, it wasn't, but that's okay. It'll dry in a minute. So they don't look all that great at this point, but I hope it's in the camera. They'll look okay, I think, when I'm done. Okay, so that's step number 2. The first step was getting the white on. The second step was adding some color. And the third step is going to be to separate the light and the dark areas. And I'm going to do that with 2 colors. The first one is my favorite color that I use on everything. So this is alizarin crimson. Oops, better get it where you can see it. Alizarin crimson. And then I always used Payne's Gray in the past, but not readily available in acrylic color. So this is navy blue. I used to mix my Payne's Gray, but I stopped doing that and just started using the navy blue, and it works pretty well. So I'm actually going to put another puddle of paint up here because I can't load my brush where I've got this one. It's better. So the reason I wanted it to be away from these other colors is because when I load my brush, I take a flat brush and I flatten it out on the palette, and I simply walk into the color to the width of float that I want. So I've got paint on just a small part of my brush, maybe a third or a quarter. If you use a large brush for floating color, you'll have a lot less trouble and be far more successful than if you try and float color with a small brush. So that's on there, and I'll just do the color on this big one, which is really wet now. But the color goes, and I want to turn this around so the leaf is facing you. So the shadows go in two places. It goes on the outside of the curved vein, so that would be here. And you can see my paint underneath isn't dry. And I'd like a lot more color, that's better. And it goes towards the end or the tip of the leaf, so that's down here. Now it's almost half of the bottom of, or half of the leaf that I fill in. So those are the two places. Let me just see how we're doing here for drying. Let me just pause this for a minute till this dries. So I think this is dry enough now. It only takes a couple of minutes, but don't paint into it wet or you'll make a mess like I did up here. And even on these smaller leaves, which are about the size, well, they're maybe a little bit bigger than the ones on the original tray, but I still used that 3/4 inch flat to put the shadows on because it's just easier. So again, walking into my paint and making sure I've got lots of color in my brush so I don't have to go over this a million times. And I'll put the shadow on the outside of the curved vein on the dark side of the leaf. So let's look at the ones that I can see first of all. So outside of the vein. Now, if when you put your strokes on, you kind of lost your curve, this is a great time to fix that and put a nice curve in. So you don't have to follow your strokes at this point because this is just kind of like a base coat now. You can correct as you go. So let me just turn this around now to do the others because it makes it easier for me to see. That's not very curved. That's better. There's another one over here. Might as well do this one too. You get to see lots of them done. I find that repetition kind of makes you remember a little bit better. So those are dry. Wait till this is dry before you do the ends or the tips. So I start at the bottom, put lots of paint in my brush, and I kind of pat and walk my way up through the leaf. So that about half of it is shaded with alizarin crimson. I found when I was teaching this a lot, it was really difficult to get students to put down enough color. Not quite sure what the fear is there, but it's only paint. And if you put lots down to begin with, then you don't have to go over it because the more color or shadow or alizarin crimson and the blue that we're about to put on that you have down, the easier it is to complete your leaf and have it look really nice. You want the color to show through and you want the lights and the darks to be separated. So you just put down lots of paint and that's how we do it. So once the alizarin is dry, then we're going to pick up, this is navy blue, but as I said, if you have Payne's gray, that works great. And I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm not going to push my brush into the paint so far. So my float is actually a little bit narrower than the original alizarin crimson float. So let me put it on this big one up here for you. Just, again, this is just so that you can see how this works. And I can start right out in the black because that's not going to show when it dries, so don't worry about that. But I pull just a little bit, just maybe a third of the way. Let me show you here. A third of the way into the leaf, and that will recess that area of the leaf. And then the other place that I put some Payne's gray, or in this case navy, is around the outside bottom half of the leaf. So it's here. So now I have Payne's gray or navy blue. I have lots of alizarin crimson, and I have 2 areas where my base coat color shows through. So let me just go ahead and do these. So just partially wisp off. It doesn't want to wisp too badly. This one over here while I've got my board turned, and this one. So you can see if you're doing a tray, you can just do all of the like things at the same time, and it goes actually pretty fast. And if you do them all at once, then usually by the time you get around to the next step, the first leaf you worked on is already dry. So there's my dark where the stem meets the leaf, and then into the leaf just a little, and then around the end or the tip. And when I do this, what I hope you'll see, and look at the clean part of the brush is to the inside of the leaf. It's not this way, right? Because that will just leave a straight line. But to float, the clean part is to the inside, the color's to the outside of the leaf. And I can dab right over that black, and when it dries, I promise you're not going to see it. So I'll just go around, and this will make actually the end or the tip of that leaf totally disappear, which is what we want, believe it or not. And you don't have to do the float in a continuous motion. You can kind of pat it like I do and fill in the space. And so that's actually the preparation for the leaf. And now, as soon as this is dry, we are ready to put the final strokes on the leaf. So we're all set now. This is kind of the background of the leaf, or the base coat of the leaf. We're all set to do that final step. And like I said, it's a little bit, if you don't understand all of this, then this final step can be a little difficult. So I would practice the way I've practiced here before you try and do the actual leaf. So I grabbed another brush. This is just a 1/2 inch or size 12. And I'm going to use this to put down some blending gel medium and some wet paint color. And then I'll use my original filbert that I used to undercoat and base coat with for the rest. Now, I also grabbed myself a dry cloth. You probably use paper towel. And I'm making sure there's no water in my stroke brush, because if we get any water in that gel, this is basically impossible to paint. So you have to keep the water out. So I've got, this brush is actually dry, and I'm not even going to wet it before I start. That way I'm sure. And I actually removed my water bucket from the side of my table here, so I don't by chance stick my brush in it. So I've got my blending gel medium here. Now this is, what did I do with the bottle? Oh, it's over here. Hang on. This is Folk Art blending gel. And I've tried extenders and all kinds of different mediums doing this leaf, and really, honestly, this is the only one I've found that works. What happens with this particular medium is, because I'm going to be adding layers of color one on top of another, there's going to be some green, there'll be alizarin crimson, the navy blue, and then there's going to be colors that I lighten with, maybe yellow or a mix of a lighter green or something. I find the colors don't mix when I lay them on top of each other when I use the blending gel, so I still get all the layers of color. With some of the other extender-like mediums for acrylics, I found that what happened was the different layers of colors just kind of merged and blended together, and so I didn't have the definition of each stroke and the definition of each color. So this is the stuff you want, and I don't know that there's another substitute, and if there was, I'd tell you, but I don't know of one. So I keep it separate. I don't want it anywhere near my wet palette because I told you before that we don't want any water in this gel medium. So try and do this kind of slowly, but I have to do it quickly because we have to get 2 or 3 layers of paint on here. It's acrylic paint, right? So you know what's happening as soon as we start to paint. It wants to dry. I have to get 2 or 3 layers on here before it dries. We have to paint wet into wet. So the first thing I'm going to do is pick up some blending gel medium, and I'm going to put a nice even coat, and don't worry about going into the black. You're not worried about that. Just get a nice even coat of blending gel medium on the leaf. Then you're going to wipe that out of your brush, and you're going to pick up your base coat color, which on this leaf was sap green, and you're going to put some wet color, so into the area that's already mapped out for you. So there's green here, and I can see a little green over here, and then there's alizarin crimson that I see, right? It was in here. So I'll lay in some, and I've got quite a bit of paint here, and the reason that there's a lot of paint down there is because the more paint you put down, the longer it takes to dry, right? And then a little bit of navy up in here, and a little bit of navy around the edge. I'm going to wipe out my brush, set it aside, pick up my filbert, and put my original base color in, but I might lighten that just a little bit to start with. So there's a little medium yellow, and I'm not going to lighten it a lot, but just a little bit. Okay, and now I'm ready to put the first layer of strokes on. We're going to aim for 3, and they'll go on in the same order and the direction that we talked about up here. So there's my spot, there's my chisel. So I'm going to touch, and I'm going to pull through that wet color towards the end of the tip of the leaf. I'm not going to wipe my brush. It's such, you really want to, but don't. The next one, and the next one. And what happens if you don't wipe your brush, you've picked up all that dark color, so by the time I get to the dark side of my leaf, guess what? It really is darker. It's not the same green that I started with, right? So there's my 2 strokes. Don't worry about that little bit there. I've got to wipe my brush. I'm going to lighten that green again slightly. That's too much, so I'll just walk the color back into the green till I get it to a color I want. Now, I don't want a ton of paint now on my brush, but I do want it evenly loaded. So that seems about right. Let's see what it looks like. So I'm going to come back here, and my second layer of strokes is going to go in between the first layer. So that would be in here, right? So I'll just start with an S, but I'm going to overlap those first 2 strokes. There it is. And I can throw in another one down here. And you see how that's a little darker? On the dark side, in between, so just 1 stroke in between. And I'll leave it at that. I'm going to wipe my brush, wipe all the paint out, squeeze it all out, and I'm going to lighten this again, and I could use more yellow, or I can lighten it with a little white. I don't want it to be, look cloudy, but I want it to be lighter, and I don't want to get it too light, and it looks chalky, cloudy. Okay, and this time I'm just going to add 1 highlight stroke. So I'm going to go back where I started, because that was going to be the lightest part of my leaf. And on the dark side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to highlight it, but I'm just going to highlight, and my chisel, do you see that little line? Can you see the little line that I just drew there? You want that little line pointing to the end of the tip of the leaf. So there's a little highlight, and I could add another one on this. Sometimes I add one, sometimes I add two. It's just kind of whatever the leaf needs. And there we go. Now, when this ridge of alizarin crimson dries, you're not even going to know it's there. And if you do, it actually kind of looks like a little vein line. So let's talk about this for a second, and then I'm going to do it again. So we started, and I went comma, S, S, and up the other side. Then I reloaded my brush with a lighter color, and then I went in between. So I only did 2 strokes. I went S, S, and I put 1 here. And then the third layer was just a highlight stroke here and some highlight around the bottom edge of the dark side of the leaf. Okay, so let's try it again. So I'm just going to wipe the paint out. I got rid of my water, so I didn't find myself wanting to use it. And now what I'll do is I'll do one where the vein curves in a different direction. So I'll just do this one here. So first step is blending gel medium. You don't need a huge amount, but enough that it covers. And don't worry about going in the black. Blending gel medium. Oops, wrong color. Then your leaf color, whatever that is, this happens to be sap green, and you just kind of pile it in to those 2 areas. Wipe your brush, pick up some alizarin crimson outside of the curved vein. Doesn't that look terrible? And the bottom half of the leaf, pick up some navy or Payne's gray, put it around the end or the tip, and a little bit in here. And now my leaf is ready to paint. So again, I'll go over to my palette, and the nice thing about, I only use a wet palette with acrylics, I can see my colors because I kind of step them out here. So if you are wanting your leaves to look like they came off the same tree, this is an easy way to do it. Now I don't want a ton of paint on my brush, so I'm going to wipe a little bit off here. But I do want it evenly loaded. So you notice it takes me quite a bit of time to load that paint into my brush. Still got a nice sharp chisel edge. And so here we go. The same order as what I did on this leaf. So, comma, S, S. Don't wipe your brush off. Just go to the dark side. And over here. And another one. And now you can wipe. There's the first layer. What was my next step? Do you remember? Lighten slightly. So I'll just take a little bit of yellow. I'll lighten this up a little bit. Don't step it too fast. Don't get too light too fast. You won't like it. That's pretty good. Come back here. Now only 2 strokes this time, right? In between those 3. So here's my S. And there's another one. And then just 1 on this side in between those original 2 strokes. Wipe my brush. Lighten again. Pick up a little white. Now again, I don't have a lot of paint on my brush here. But I do have it evenly loaded. Now that's way too light, so we'll just walk some green back in here. It'll look pretty chalky if I get that light. And even though it looks dark, even though it looks dark over here, when you get it on here, it's going to look pretty light. Let's see what this looks like. So, highlight stroke at the beginning of my leaf, the top of the leaf. So that's here, a comma stroke. See how light that looks? Or does it? It does to me. And then make sure I've got a chisel on my brush and come back and highlight just a little short stroke whisked off and highlight the dark side of the leaf. So howbei I do one more and then I'll throw some line work on. So again, I'm just wiping out my brush. I'm not going to my water. Grab my other brush, pick up some gel medium, and I'll just cover this leaf with gel medium. So you don't have to, you know, take your time to do it. Just make sure it's on evenly. Wipe that out. Grab your base coat color of your leaf. So that was sap green. And I use the same brush that I use for my gel. Wipe it out. Some alizarin crimson around the bottom. Look at all that alizarin crimson just piled on. A little bit of navy or Payne's gray around the edge. And I'm ready to paint my leaf. So I'll come back. I lightened the base coat color slightly. I'll maybe pull that up so you can see it. Slightly. Maybe I lightened it too much. Let's put a little bit more original color back in there. Now I don't need a ton of paint. I'm going to wipe that out of my brush and go back and make sure I've got a chisel edge on my brush. And we'll begin to paint. So here's comma, S, S, and up the other side. Wipe your brush out. Lighten the color slightly. My dog has just joined me here, so if you hear something, that's the tail wagging, hitting the painting table. So lighten slightly again. Second layer of strokes in between. So here's an S and an S and another one. Wipe it out. Lighten again. Again, don't get too light. That's plenty light enough, I think. Make sure your brush is evenly loaded. Come back here. There's a highlight comma. Fix my chisel. Come to the dark side. Add a little highlight. Come over here. Add a little highlight. And there you go. So that is basically it. The only thing that I add to this is some line work. And if you're going to put line work on, please be sure you don't want white lines. So you want to go back to, you could go back to the lightest color that you had on your palette for your green. That may be even too light. And the other thing is I had to get some water there to loosen the paint because with a liner brush. So I don't want it too light. Let's see if that's going to move. Yeah, not bad. Make sure you fill that liner up because it doesn't, there aren't a lot of hairs to hold a lot of paint, so you got to make sure it's full to start with. So on your leaf, this one's pretty much dry. You can pull in a, I hope you can see that, you can pull in a vein line. Now, that's too light for me. I would not want the vein line to show up that much, but it's probably better I leave it that way so that you can actually see what's going on. Now, there's different ways to outline the edge of the leaf. Sometimes I don't put any. If my leaves look really halfway decent, then I may not put any on. And sometimes I put lots on. So let's just see what we can do here. Now my gel is still wet here. Do you see that where it's sitting on the black without any acrylic paint in it? But where the paint is, it's dry. So I'm hoping I can paint through it. Let's see how that works. So one of the ways that you can outline is to just do something like this. Is to just kind of go up and down, like almost like a squiggle. And you don't have to do it without stopping. You can come down and then go up, and then down and then go up. Would be fine. So let's just see how that'll work here. There's a down and an up. Oh, you can see how that's bleeding. That's because that gel's wet. Let's see if we can get rid of that. No, not going to work. So quite often on the dark side, because I pretty much have the edge of the leaf defined by that highlight you can see here and here, I often don't put anything on the dark side. If anything, I might, you know, pull a little line at the top where maybe it's not quite as defined. Let me just see if I can. Be a while before that gel dries. I'm just loading my brush. It's off camera, but I probably should do it in front of you so you can see what I'm doing. So, lay the brush down to load a liner. Don't try and load it upright. My dog's here in my lap now. Head in my lap. So if the camera starts to move, oh, which it's going to. Okay, that should be loaded okay. Let's go over here. So sometimes you can take a leaf and you can actually change the shape of the leaf with the outline. So watch, I'm going to go way out here. You see that? I didn't follow the shape of the leaf at all. So I would go way out there and then do something like that. Kind of fun. So sometimes let's do one this way. Sometimes I'll just pull a leaf, so I'll just pull a little end on it like this, and then maybe just put a couple of strokes like that, and sometimes you'll see there's a few little lines at the end there. So that's about it for the leaf. I hope that clarifies it. Clear as mud, right? If you still have problems, for the people that ask me to show you this, just message me again and we'll have another go at it. I'll see what I can do for you. So thanks a lot. Talk soon. Take care. Stay in. Stay safe. Stay well.